Well, as I said, thank you for joining us today. I'm Dan Sweet, Director of Public Relations and Communications for HAI. We know that this is an interesting time for everyone, so we really appreciate the fact that you took the time to come to our webinar today. Before we get started, I'd like to run through our guests and our schedule today. Start out with, as always, we will hear from Jim Viola, our President and CEO of HAI. Then buckle your seats for a presentation from Sarah MacLeod and Brett Levanto from the Aeronautical Repair Station the Aeronautical Repair Station Association, or ARSA. We'll wrap up our presentations today with Crystal Maguire from the Aviation Technical Education Council, or ATEC. As always, we invite you to ask questions. We will respond to the questions at the end of the presentations. To ask your questions, we ask that you use the module in the control panel on the side of your screen. It opens up a small dialog box. It'll ask you to write down your question. We will not respond immediately. As I said, we will respond to all questions at the very end of both presentations. Also, to let you know, you will receive a copy of the video presentation for today. So if you missed something, you can go back and watch it later on. I know that there's a couple of email addresses and the contact addresses for Sarah and Brett. So if you need to get in touch with them, that information's available. That video usually comes at least a day, up to a day later. We'll try to get it to you as fast as we can. It sounds like GoToWebinar is taking more time than normal right now to process these videos, simply because there are so many people holding meetings like this one. And so now, I'd like to turn this over to Jim Viola.
Well, thanks, Dan. Hello, and thank you for joining us today. I think last time I looked, there's about 28 different countries. So depending on where you are around the world, you might call them mechanics, you might call them engineers, whatever their title for aviation maintenance technicians, they are the reason that our rotorcraft aircraft keep flying today. So some aviation maintenance techs, they work in factories, others work in hangars, specialty shops, and some of you that are out there, I know, work out in the weather, you work out on the ramp. Regardless of your role and the role that you play, these men and women make up an essential part of our flight team. So without maintainers, our aircraft would sit on the ground. The maintenance support is essential if we are to accomplish the missions that make our industry vital around the world and unique. Later this month, May 24th, in fact, we'll recognize Aviation Maintenance Technician Day. That date was chosen in honor of Charles Taylor, the man who designed and worked through the multiple designs and built the first aircraft engine for the Wright brothers. Talk about paving a new road forward in the early 1900s. In honor of this first aviation maintenance professional, we salute the men and women who follow in his footsteps. This brings us to today's topic. Along with everyone else in our industry, the COVID-19 pandemic is affecting maintenance providers across the vertical flight spectrum. Some companies are using this time, just like we call the Land and Live program, of taking the downtime to conduct deep maintenance inspections in advance of scheduled routine when others are conducting preventive maintenance. So whatever you're doing this time, now is a great time to start turning, while many maintain folks are turning wrenches and keeping much of our needed aircraft flying, now is also time to get up to speed on some of the other operations that maybe have slipped over the time. In today's webinar, we're going to discuss how all of our maintenance professionals can use this downtime to train and maintain compliance for themselves and also for the aircraft that you oversee. Often, maintenance folks don't get the recognition they deserve, but that's not the case today at HAI. Today is the first of many webinars we will hold in support of maintenance folks and the issues affecting them. From the possibility, or not only possibility, but actually happening, remote conducted inspections, to the inclusion of virtual reality in aircraft maintenance. We'll cover topics that meet the needs of those who keep us airborne. And that's you. So bring those topics to us, get them to Dan Sweet, and we'll make sure we address them on these webinars. So now I'm pleased to bring in our first two panelists, Sarah MacLeod and Brett Levanto, representing the Aeronautical Repair Station Association. I beat Dan on that pronunciation. And thank you, Sarah, for joining us today on this webinar. Sarah and I worked a little bit back and forth when I was in the FAA. I look forward to being in the same room with her, but I'm certainly privileged to be on the same webinar with her today. So thanks, Sarah, for joining us.
More than welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Jim. This is Brett Levanto. I'm just waiting, Dan, to see the presentation come up on my screen so that I know that it's live. There it is. It's got Sarah and my name spelled just precisely correctly. Thank you very much for that intro. When you say maintenance counts here today, I was in my mind hearing some stadium rock ballads in the background. So I hope everybody else got that same kind of emotional experience from it, and we'll ride that wave throughout the rest of the presentation. So I'll do our kickoff for the Aeronautical Repair Station Association ARSA content. You'll see we've co-branded it today with Obadal, Filler, MacLeod and Klein PLC. That's ARSA's management firm. We thought it was valuable to give you kind of the two-hatted approach, as it were, to continued compliance during the pandemic. Put together one of our fancy title slides for you. We'll give you a little bit more basic information, which is my job, so that I can tee up Sarah for the content that we wanted to present to you here today. So if you haven't heard of ARSA or the firm, whether you want to undertake the challenge of saying the association's name out or just cutting it right down to ARSA, there are two entities that work hand in glove. ARSA is devoted to the aviation maintenance industry. It's got members across the world and provides a variety of different services to its members, which the good work comes through the law firm, Obadal, Filler, MacLeod and Klein, which practices the activities required for individual certificate holders and entities out in the aviation and transportation space. Sarah likes to say that ARSA does the prophylactic work, and the law firm gives you some help when your prophylactics maybe didn't protect you like you thought they should have. This is Sarah and my basic information. Gives you a little bit of our relationship to each other, as well as our work for ARSA and the firm. Want to give you a brief overview of our goal here based on what you already know about the webinar that you joined in today. And by the time you're done, our objectives is to give you the tools to understand the rules, because one of ARSA's and certainly the firm's founding principles is to start with the rules and build compliance based on those, using other resources to assist you, but remembering always that the regulations, in this case for mechanics under parts 43 and 65, repair stations under 43 as well as 145, and operators under 43, 65, 91, and 135 have their responsibility grounded in the rules, no pun intended, for aviation safety. You'll notice part 43 and its rules for mechanics run through the entire discussion that we have planned for you here today. So just like if we were on an ARSA training course, it's now my privilege to pass things along to Sarah MacLeod.
And every time you give a woman a remote control, you know you're in trouble. So, ladies and gentlemen, today what we're trying to do is help you understand how you can use these regulations in the United States to conduct fairly routine activities under either your mechanic certificate or your 145 certificate, and how an operator can also expand those capabilities into its training programs, into its remote and virtual technology when actually performing maintenance on something and needing to actually look inside the engine or the airframe, etc. So look, very few people look at section 1.1, but it's got some pretty good information when you're talking about maintenance and preventive maintenance. All right, it doesn't define alteration, but an alteration is, as you can see on this slide, a change from one approved configuration to another. The maintenance rules are one of the few rules in Part 43 that are strictly performance-based. The performance requirement is that you return the article to at least its original or properly altered condition, and that is only with respect to the work performed. So when we are talking about remote technology, you as the certificated person can use other persons, individuals and firms to help in that regard. However, the person that is issuing the approval for return to service for the work performed has to do so truthfully. So here's the section. Here's the one that does not say you have to be in person on premise in order to use the methods, techniques, and practices depicted in a maintenance manual. And of course, we're focusing on things like inspecting and supervising. So here's the basic requirements for every single person out there that is a maintenance provider or uses a maintenance provider as an owner operator. The maintenance must be done properly and it must be recorded properly, and you don't get a lie about things or mislead people about what was done. So when you look at the privileges under Part 43 for a mechanic, you are all authorized to perform maintenance, preventive maintenance, and alteration within your ratings. Within those ratings, you have general requirements. You have to know what the hell you're doing, and you have to read the instructions and understand those instructions either from the manufacturer or from your operator or from a designated engineering representative, etc. But if you have those basic qualifications, you've done the work before, you know your elbow from other bodily parts, you know how to perform the maintenance properly, you may supervise that maintenance. So again, you can supervise people remotely if you have the ability to do that the same as if you were in person on premises. So obviously supervision depends upon the knowledge of the individual you're supervising. Some people you have to supervise directly, but if you look at the regulations, it says that you must supervise to the extent necessary to determine if the job was performed properly. So if you have somebody that's completely inexperienced, the supervision would probably be watching every step the person took. If you have an experienced person, it may not take that much responsibility on your part, and it may be easier to do remotely. You may not be able to supervise an inexperienced person remotely, but can you at least do an inspection remotely with somebody that understands how to move the visual aid around, and you have complete audio transmission where you can tell the person where to move that visual aid, etc., then yes, I believe under the regulations and the plain language of the regulations, you can perform those functions. It's the same if you are a repair station. Remember, it's a repair station that is approving for return to service the work that would be performed. If you needed to do a borescope inspection between, Miami and Dallas, and you had an experienced person at the other end of the borescope that knew how to slide it down the engine's interior without damaging it, my statement is that I don't see how the borescope equipment knows where you are when you are viewing its results. So it would be the same with a repair station. An inspector or a supervisor on the roster could accomplish those oversight and visual inspection requirements remotely. Obviously, if you're a repair station, you have to have your quality policies and procedures explaining what the parameters of those types of inspections may be. You don't have to have it in there. There's nothing in the rule that requires it, but obviously it would lower the stomach acid of any of the aviation oversight personnel to ensure that the work was in fact being properly executed, and you could put that under your training program. So in wrap up, if you're an operator and you need things accomplished, a maintenance arena, this is an opportunity for you to ask whether or not your maintenance providers are comfortable with certain inspections being done in that manner, or if somebody would be willing to supervise a person performing simple or non-complex maintenance tasks remotely. So the bottom line is, from ARSA's point of view, and of course that means Sarah McLeod's point of view in this regard, what's not prohibited is allowed. Do the task properly. If you can do the task properly remotely and you make a record of it, I do not see that that could ever result in a violation of the regulations. And with that, I think I get to turn it over to Ms. Maguire. And these slides will be available, I believe, Dan, and anybody that needs to contact us, that's the contact information. And of course, you can easily find us on the internet. Thank you.
All right, Dan, am I just to go?
You are ready to go, Crystal.
All right, let me make sure that here we go. All right. Hi, I'm Crystal Maguire, Executive Director of the Aviation Technician Education Council. I'm here at my home alone with my 4-year-old, so I'm just giving everybody a heads up that we might get interrupted at any moment. So just a little bit about ATEC. I'm going to shift gears a little bit and talk about maintenance training and the maintenance training community and some of the impacts that the current pandemic is having on that community. I'm going to be speaking from a US-based perspective. The majority of ATEC members are based in the US. Our membership roles are primarily made up of aviation maintenance technician schools with Part 147 FAA Part 147 certificates. We also have a good collection of schools that have other types of aviation programs. A lot of our certificated schools have technical programs, be it sheet metal or NDT training. So we like to say that we represent sort of the makeup of the aviation maintenance training community when it comes to the actual educational institutions. Of course, we also have industry members, airlines, MRO, they run the gamut. We send out our students to business aviation, general aviation. So we'd like to say we're sort of the common denominator of aviation education, if you will. So 72% of the current Part 147 schools are members of ATEC, so we have a pretty good market share, if you will. This is just a map on our website. I'm going to talk in a little bit about some maintenance professional development opportunities. For those of you, I think Mr. Riley talked about downtime right now. If you've got some downtime, we'll give you some resources where you can perhaps fill that time, and this will be a good reference for you. This map on our website shows not only schools with certificated A&P programs, but also other technical related programs that I spoke about. So you can go in and filter it by type of program, obviously the state, region where you live. So generally speaking, impacts on training and testing. For Part 147 schools, which like I said is sort of our primary focus when we're looking at the current pandemic and trying to navigate our training programs through some of the issues that are coming up, the FAA pretty quickly, I think it was the middle of March, came out with a memorandum allowing our schools a little bit more flexibility when it comes to providing content online. So for those of you that aren't familiar with the A&P school and how it works, those schools have to gain, they have a lot of operational restrictions, if you will, from the Federal Aviation Administration. They have to have certain approvals for their curriculum, and they cannot provide content online unless it's specifically approved by the agency. So out of that 181 schools I mentioned before, there's probably only 5 or 6 that are doing any kind of online delivery of their content. So whenever school shutdowns started coming around, you can imagine the impact. It had impact on, the educational infrastructure across the board, but was especially acute for our technical programs, given that they were so reliant on in-person, hands-on training. So the first thing we tried to do was work with the FAA to free up some of the restrictions on the schools to provide their content online. So like I said, the agency was really quick on the trigger. I think around half of our schools, half of the 181 schools are right now approved to deliver content temporarily online. They're still restricted in the type of content that they provide. There's manipulative skill requirements when it comes to students being able to complete certain projects. So a lot of our schools, I'll talk about it in a minute, aren't necessarily graduating students unless they can get the students into the classroom to finish some of their project requirements. But nevertheless, appreciate the agency and the flexibility that provided pretty quickly to allow our schools to get at least some of that general content up and running online. And they also allow the schools to change their attendance policies a little bit. There's some, again, operational restrictions on how many absences are allowed for a Part 147 program, or at least that you have policies in place that set forth the number of absences allowed, and they relaxed on those too. So a lot of our schools, you know, we're pretty much down, suspended, not doing any operations for a few weeks. That was covered, at least from the FAA perspective, because they were able to expand the number of absences allowed for their students. So there was a couple of revisions that came out to that memorandum. There's a link there on the slides that will be available to you afterwards if you're interested. And then on the testing side, FAA testing, at least for the AMP, is still going on. The testing centers and DME testing is largely dependent on local and state restrictions. So there's a link there to testing centers that are currently closed. A lot of them are open and a lot of them are testing just under social distancing measures. And then the same thing for the DMEs, largely dependent on the individual DME and whether he or she wants to continue the oral and practical testing required for an FAA mechanic certificate. Just to give you some stats, we have, like I said, been working pretty closely with testing standards at the FAA. They gave us some numbers just to kind of give you an idea of some of the impacts on testing. So in March, the beginning of March, the first 2 weeks of March, the FAA DMEs did 615 mechanic tests. The first 2 weeks in April, they were down to 84. So a pretty significant decline in the number of tests, as we would, quite frankly, expect. Did I go too fast? Hang on. Cool. I'll quickly talk to you specifically about some of the impact on Part 147 schools we've been surveying. Our membership, again, US-based schools. I'm sure that there are lots of parallels being drawn for our EASA Part 147 counterparts, but like I said, out of the 181 FAA certificated schools, I think I said 50% before, but based on the latest survey, I think it's closer to 75% that have some sort of approval to provide online content. A lot of them are doing either strictly online or a hybrid if they can get their students into the classroom, hybrid instruction. Around a quarter of the schools, which is a little bit more concerning, have totally suspended their operations. So we've certainly asked them why. A lot of it was, you know, local restrictions where they just could not bring the students in at all. So they were limited, at least perceived limited in, you know, their ability to get the content finalized. FAA regulations were often cited. Either, again, the school sort of perceived that barrier was too large, one, to get across. So like around a quarter of the schools have been suspended. So just, we know that that's certainly going to have an impact on our output of certificated mechanics. I'm sure that the same is the same case for some of our non-certificated programs. We asked too about graduate and enrollment projections. So we all know that there was a lot of work. HAI and ARSA were both heavily involved in workforce development, us trying to meet workforce projections. We're concerned, obviously, about the impact COVID's going to have on the current pipeline, and so we're asking questions just to try to get a gauge for, you know, what the schools are thinking as far as output for the next 2 years. Around half of the respondents expected that this year's graduations to decrease by around 25%. My guess is that a lot of that is because they're having to delay graduations in order to get the practical, you know, labs completed, as I mentioned. 60% of those respondents expect their enrollment, so for 2020 and 2021, to also decrease by an average of 28%. And I mentioned it before, but one of the biggest challenges that the schools are having, not necessarily getting content online, even though we know several of them are not even doing that, but it's getting the lab work finished. So that, which requires manipulative skill, trying to work with the agency to figure out how some of that can be done online. We're working on various projects for curriculum development, again, to try to get some of those manipulative skills that we can do through virtual reality, and so those sorts of things, so we can at least decrease the amount of time that a student will have to be back in the classroom whenever the schools do open again. And then another way that we're trying to work with our schools to get our students, at least those that are nearing graduation. You know, we have graduates that were coming up in May. One of the ways that schools are working through some of these lab requirements is through 147.31 allows a Part 147 school to give a student credit for previous experience. So we've got some schools who have, you know, instructors that have their aircraft owners. They're able to work with the student one-on-one, practicing social distancing measures as appropriate, and getting that student some of that requisite experience that would satisfy some of those lab requirements, and then giving those students credit based on previous experience. So if you're around an AMP school and you guys have opportunities to be able to provide some access to equipment for students through, you know, work or apprenticeships or those sorts of things, and that's certainly something that schools are going to be looking at for their students. Okay, and I promised that I would put out some opportunities for professional development. So these are always out there. It's not necessarily something that's new given the current situation. So as you think about either for yourself professional development or your workforce, these types of things are always available. So wanted to kind of go through a couple of examples. It's largely going to be dependent on the programs where you go to for instruction. So if you're looking at a local community college or university, reach out to them. I've reached out to schools that we work with very closely just to get some ideas of what's out there. So this is just sort of a selection, if you will, of the possibilities. But so CA2VES was a collaboration between a Part 147 school and Clemson University. They got some NRF funding a few years back to put Part 147 general curriculum online. Some of our Part 147 schools are using that curriculum. Some of them that have been approved to provide online instruction are using that curriculum to satisfy their online general requirements. So Clemson is making that curriculum available for free to individuals and schools through August 2020. There are 13 courses that are available right now online that track the 147 general curriculum. So if you want to shore up, I imagine it's largely based on the individual school, but if it's something that, you know, I saw that there were some students signed up, or maybe, you know, you're looking to get certificated or you're looking to maybe get an associate's degree, I imagine that this course content could easily be utilized as credit for a degree or a certificate program, depending, of course, on the school. So I believe that this will give you certificates totally free, and the content's pretty good. We've audited it when it was being developed. So that's a resource for you. Aviation Institute of Maintenance has several online cash pay courses. They have 12 campuses across the U.S. So I just put a couple of their opportunities for you to be able to, again, pay, but for an online course. One of them is that test prep, which is a good overview of pretty much everything in Part 147. So if either you have experience necessary to obtain your mechanic certificate, but you just needed a test, that could be a good option for you to get that test prep. And then Embry-Riddle also has several education online courses. All of these, we talked a little bit about it in our prep for this webinar. If you're looking too at IA renewal refresher credit, these could be used to satisfy that. Just because they're not approved by the FAA for IA renewal credit now doesn't mean they are not eligible. They all track, you know, 147 requirements. So that's just another opportunity for you. And then, like I said, at least the Clemson content is totally free. So all that one takes is time. And then for somebody that maybe is looking to jump in a little deeper, we have several four-year colleges that have AMP programs. So they're aviation-focused schools. Southern Illinois University is one of them. Two opportunities that you should look at for a potential bachelor's. One is a lot of them will have classes that you can audit. So SIU specifically has their CLPP program, which means you find the course that you want to audit, you get approval from the instructor who signs off, and you can sit in on the class. A lot of their courses are online now. Even if they were in person before, they're going to start doing online, I believe, in the fall. So that wouldn't necessarily get you credit. But again, if you wanted to get something that maybe get you IA renewal, or you saw a course that you were interested in just for professional development, purposes, that's a really good opportunity. And like I said, a lot of schools do that same sort of thing. This is just one example. And then SIU in particular does a full online maintenance management program. I only know of a couple that are fully online for a bachelor's. Oshkosh, Wisconsin is another one. It's a 120-hour credit program, but they will give you credit if you've got an A&P, and they'll give you credit if you have experience. So if you have an A&P, you've been working in the field for a while, you're interested in maybe going to get a bachelor's, for this program, you would have basically 20 classes that you would need to complete the bachelor's. And if you had any general ed, credits before, maybe you got an associate's or something, you could also use that to satisfy that 30-hour general ed. So you could have as little as 30 hours needed to finish a bachelor's degree. So just one example I mentioned before at the top with the school directory on the ATEC website. That's a great place to go check out programs near you. Like I said, find out exactly what it is that the school can offer. I know that they're all really, they're really excited to work with industry, and they absolutely would be interested in having, folks that are already in the field come in for professional development classes. So it's just a matter of asking. And then to wrap it up, I just wanted to put in a plug. This may or may not be on the description of the session. Choose Aerospace is a new 501c3 organization, a collaboration of stakeholders that originally came together to talk about career awareness for aviation maintenance. We just got it incorporated last month, but we've decided to shift gears a little bit, given that our original original project plan included this, big awareness campaign. Given the current pandemic, we decided, and the need, quite frankly, for online content, we also asked our Part 147 schools how many of them would continue to provide content online. So if you'll remember, we only had a couple that were providing online content leading up to March. And now schools are saying half of them would continue to provide at least some sort of content online, which is a massive shift in how aviation technical education could look moving forward. So we think there is a real need for content, an opportunity for us to get equipment, more relevant equipment in the classroom through virtual reality and those sorts of things. So this organization is now going to concentrate on curriculum development, curriculum that will track requirements in the Airman Certification Standards, which we think will be the basis for Part 147 moving forward. But we'll also be able to use modular, be able to break it up to support high school pathway programs, the stackable credentialing programs where an individual might be able to move through the employment pathway as far as they wanted to go, perhaps to mechanic certification, but always be quote unquote employable, along the way. So an RFP is going to be going out next week, asking for potential partners and vendors who can create this type of content in various medias. So look for that. It'll be on the ATEC website next week. We just want to get the word out on the project and get in. We don't want to remake any wheels. And we want to make sure that it's a collaborative effort. So just wanted to kind of pitch that idea and say, look for that. Hopefully Choose Aerospace will have some curriculum packages to be able to support aviation maintenance technician pathway projections in the future. So Dan, I think that's my last slide.
Okay, Crystal, really appreciate that. The presentation was fantastic. I do see we have some questions coming in. I also see that we had a number of people who came into the presentation a little bit late, so I would like to remind people that yes, there will be a video version of this available. It will come via email to all attendees. It may be as late as 24 hours from now, depending on how quickly GoToWebinar can produce the video. But it will be coming out to you as well. I'm actually going to jump off topic a little bit. I'm going to ask Greg Brown, our Manager of Education for HAI, to join us and talk about the educational courses that are available online through HAI. We do have a couple of questions coming in, but let's get Greg to talk to us real quick. Greg,
hey Dan, thanks. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we have kind of a really good program online. It's maintenance specific. We had a very good showing at the Road to Safety Challenge, and those course presentations were recorded and are available online. They're free to our members. And some of the examples you can see is best practices in maintenance record keeping, turbine engine hygiene, and the SUAS maintenance. So that's just to name a few. So there's quite a few other courses available there. So folks, if you want to go, just go online to the Online Academy, take a good look and see some of the courses that we have available to you. And again, these are all good courses that are, again, free to our members, and non-members may pay a small fee.
Okay, Greg, thank you. I appreciate that this afternoon. We have had a couple of questions come in. I do encourage viewers to respond to questions or to ask questions using the question module on the side of your control panel. Question for Crystal. Being an A&P mechanic is such a hands-on career, how could online training incorporate the necessary access to equipment?
Yeah, so our schools have, I mean, if you've been in an A&P school, some of them don't necessarily have equipment that you might see if you're working for, say, a commercial airline, right? So some of the vendors that we've been working with, and again, just to try to get ideas and answers to those types of questions, can online training really provide the manipulative skill, or at least supplement it, right? We wouldn't suggest that everything be taught online. It's just not. But given the current, situation and how we see some of the training moving forward, so like, for example, one of the simulations for one of the virtual reality vendors that we were working with would put you in an aircraft, right? You'd be able to see an aircraft that you wouldn't necessarily see in an A&P school. So when I say access to more relevant equipment, it would be in a virtual environment. But again, just getting them accustomed to some of the stuff that they might see after they graduate. And one of the vendors we worked with actually uses that the program for gap training. So it's a major airline. If they hire new entrants, they put them through a month of the simulations, just like you would for a pilot, a month of simulations to try to narrow the gap, what the student learned in A&P school versus what they need to know to be a successful employee. So we're just saying, why aren't we doing that in A&P school, right? Instead of doing it. Some of that has to do with regulatory restrictions and all those things that we're working out. But to answer your question, I mean, I think I tried to do quotes for my equipment. So not actual equipment, but, in a virtual environment.
Okay, and this is apparently a sign of the times. Crystal, this question is also for you. I think it has to do with people watching from home and looking to see what kind of a home offices people have. Question, where did you get the artwork that's behind you?
I don't know. I have to. It was my local. So shop local. It was a local artist.
Okay. Well,
Hey Dan. This is Brett. I also want to build off of Crystal's point on, or the question Crystal handled regarding, technical competencies using remote tools. I want to enhance that and take the next step into any environment, but particularly when you're already in the professional or working environment, to remember that technical competencies are obviously incredibly important, but that is one kind of piece of the pyramid in terms of holistic training, because you also have professionalism and regulatory competency, which are vitally important to performing in any workplace environment, but particularly in a heavily regulated, human factors dependent environment like aviation. So if you're listening to this and you're already out in industry, this is a great opportunity for yourself or for your people, if you're at a management or supervisor or shop lead level, a great opportunity to remember those other training needs as well. So bolster regulatory comprehension and knowledge, bolster professionalism, focus on human factors training. A lot of those can really be effective using virtual tools or online through ARSA training or other resources that are available. So really think holistically, like we've been trying to get to do, the agency to do, in terms of all the different parts of your competencies and your knowledge and skills that you have to bolster in your workplace.
That's perfect timing, Brett, because we did get a question from Femi. is there any online training for management staff on effective communication and leadership that either one of you know about?
I mean, I'm sure that SIU program addresses some of that. And Embry-Riddle, I know, has some too. I don't know specifically. Go ahead, Sarah. I think I heard you.
Well, no, that's what I was going to tell you, that part of the BS, yes, sorry, in
Yeah.
maintenance
Bachelor of
management,
Science.
sorry, is part of that quote unquote management technique. But unfortunately, in aviation, we don't need to know how to manage people. We just need to know how to do the job ourselves. And it is something that definitely lacks in this specific training. But training for management positions, either in a family-owned environment or a unionized environment, et cetera, are replete if you Google it. Because
And Dan, this is Greg.
people know I need management training, but it hasn't happened yet.
And Dan, this is Greg. If I could jump in, we do have some courses from business training experts online that deal with management and communications. And again, available to everyone. So if they go on an online academy, they can look at some of those courses and have them available to them to take.
Okay. Thank you, Greg. Appreciate that. We have a question for Sarah. What are the particular requirements for signing off a remote inspection? For example, should you use specific language in signing off a remote inspection or for supervision of a mechanic?
You know, that's a great question. I'm glad whoever asked it did ask it. We've been going back and forth on this issue because 43.9, which is the maintenance record keeping rule in the United States, is very, I mean, you can put like 5 words on it practically and meet some of the requirements. Today, you are not asked what tool you used to do the inspection. Say it's a 10X. It's not like you're told, write down that I did a 10X inspection. What you say is inspected per umpty squat part of the manual or umpty squat part of the inspection criteria. Do I think that you should know that that inspection was done remotely and that the note should be for you? Or if you are in a 145 environment, is it a good idea to know that that did take place remotely? Yes. Is it a regulatory requirement? No.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Javier from Mexico Airbus Helicopters is asking, is the FAA more open to using technical webinars as training options until everything goes back to normal?
Never had a problem with it. I'm sorry, Crystal, that I probably interrupted your thoughts on this, but training for internal purposes, 135, 145, even as a 65, there has never been a prohibition. If your particular manual prohibits and says all this training has to be in person, then change your manual. But there's never been a prohibition. That's number one. And number two, I apologize to everybody that is on the webinar, but the FAA recently put out on the 20th of last month, Brett will correct me if I'm wrong, Flight Standards put out a memo to all of its employees that said video technology is busted wide open. If you can do it, there's 4 or 5 considerations you're supposed to make. If you can do it, bring it to the FAA. If the FAA can do something remotely, also bring it to the FAA. So it is going to start doing inspections remotely, auditing inspections. It has not broken the ceiling yet, but it's working on it. So the FAA has no issues, or should have no issues.
It was April 22nd, and I didn't remember that off the top of my head. I don't know if I could have guessed as closely as Sarah, but I went and quickly checked arsa.org/remote-connectivity. So if you out there need information about the current policies out there, the grounding in the rules, and actually some information about industry efforts going back to 2018 related to remote tools, you can go to that site, arsa.org/remote-connectivity.
Okay, Brett, I
Yeah, and
appreciate
for the
your adding
training
that.
community, I would just say from a training perspective, I mean, the same is true. There's never been a prohibition to provide content online. We got ourselves in this a little bit because we sort of, before I came along, asked for permission, right, to be able to provide some of the content online. There are some elements of the rule that require, manipulative skill, which by definition oftentimes means hands-on. So that's really the only limitation from a U.S. certificated training perspective is when it comes to online content delivery.
Okay, we have a question from Chuck. Looks like it's for Sarah. Could an A&P complete a 100-hour inspection on site and an IA or CRS signing off the annual inspection remotely?
Well, you asked, he asked a very important, he doesn't realize I'm a lawyer, right? So could you? I don't know. Could you? The issue is, again, that's right in the rule, right? That the IA can, supervise, and I can't remember, he probably knows it better than I do, the 100-hour inspection, et cetera. I mean, it's right in the rule. Can the IA supervise you? Does he have enough visual acumen? Does he have to smell the oil? Does he have to feel the oil coming out of a reciprocating engine to make sure that there's no chips in it? I mean, I don't know. These are technical questions. The question back to you, good sir, is if you are either the A&P or the IA, can you truthfully make a record that you did in fact supervise to the extent necessary to ensure the inspection was performed properly, or whatever the other duties are in Part 65 before you can issue an approval for return to service? 43.5, 43.7, 43.9 need to be read again. Make sure you can be truthful. And yes, then the answer will be yes. If the answer is no, I have to be there as the IA because I do XYZ things, then the answer is no.
Okay, thank you. This is for all panelists from Terry Palmer. The HAI Training Working Group is working to provide more resources for the maintenance sector. Do you think there's a need for rotorcraft specific human factor courses or safety training?
Okay, so my position on human factors or any of the non-objective type of criteria is that every company and every segment of this industry is going to have some amount of training on its specific uses of various tools and technology. So my answer would be yes. Now, is it a viable thing for outside the company to offer? Maybe not. Maybe it would just be, I've got a really good helicopter technician and I can move them into my environment with very little training. But the experience portion of Part 65 cannot be underestimated. Remember, whatever you learn at Crystal schools, you don't get to exercise the privileges of that certificate until you know your elbow from other bodily parts, right? You have to do it under the supervision of somebody that does know his elbow from other bodily parts and can verify that you can do that without that person's supervision the next time. That's part of the responsibilities of that certificate. Oh, I didn't get the training, the A&P mechanic says to me, then why did you do the job? You've got to understand that really important aspect of your certificate. Nothing replaces experience.
Crystal, do you have anything you wanted to add there?
Yeah, I mean, just from a third-party training perspective, it's going to totally depend on the industry demand. So our good friends, I know they're heavily involved at HAI at Southern Utah University, have our rotorcraft-specific programs. I'm sure their human factors program is rotorcraft-specific. The school isn't probably going to adopt something like that unless the companies that are hiring their students are demanding it, and then, you know, they adjust as needed. So.
Okay, appreciate that. For Sarah, how is helicopter delivery acceptance inspection conducted for factory new or pre-owned helicopters?
Geez, they must think I'm a real guru. I'm not really sure. I haven't been involved in a brand new delivery inspection, but remember, my presentation was focused on is the regulation, what the regulation requires. That sounds like a contractual inspection. And I'm not trying to avoid the question, whoever asked it. It's just that, again, the focus has to be, can you do whatever it is as if you were there in person or better? Good. So how are they done? I have no idea. I do know that there are manufacturers today in the fixed wing world that are doing manufacturing required inspections. In other words, the design requires an inspection, visual and sometimes radiographic, etc. A lot of those inspections are allowed to be done remotely by this particular manufacturer because they have the procedures in their quality manual.
Okay, I think we've got time for one more question, and happily we've got one more question from Alejandro. He says, this isn't particularly maintenance related. What are online options for CRM, CFIT, ALAR training courses for our helicopter crews?
You know, the FAA has quite a few, Dan, and I don't know if Greg or you or whatever just kind of keeps a list of those, but almost any of those acronyms can be put into a Google search, and you'll find lots of opportunities for training and learning.
Okay, thanks,
Yeah,
Sarah.
I hand it over to HAI. You guys probably know better than I do on that one.
Yeah, Dan, you know, we don't currently have any of those, but we're working on getting some of those online as well.
Okay, thanks, Greg. Thanks, Crystal. Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Brett. This has been a really informative afternoon. I certainly appreciate the time and assistance that everybody gave us today. I do have a few more housekeeping things to wrap up today. There will be a questionnaire coming shortly to everybody who's attended. We certainly appreciate the time that you could take to filling out the questionnaire. It's vital for us to know exactly what you need, and so that we can present future webinars. It's the best way you can tell us what you specifically need us to address following that questionnaire. Save the date. Our next webinar is a week from today, Thursday the 21st at 1600 Eastern Time. We're going to address what fire season might look like during the pandemic. We're going to focus primarily here in the US, but we've had some pretty massive wildfires the last few years. We just are looking for an update. We expect to have people from the Department of the Interior, the US Forest Service, and a trade organization that deals with firefighting called ASAFA. There will be a link in email, social media, and Rotor Daily for those events if anybody wants to join us. Finally, again, as always, in general, we would like to know what HAI can do for you, what we're doing right, what we're doing wrong, what we need to do more of. The easiest way to do that is contact us through email at president@rotor.org. That goes directly to President Jim Viola. He sees them all, and we will respond to them. Until next week, we thank you for your time. Please fly safely and be safe yourselves. Have a good afternoon.